The cold was a physical entity in the Brooks Range, a predator that stalked the valleys and gnawed at the peaks. It seeped through the triple-layered insulation of the geohab, crystallized on the inside of the triple-paned windows, and made the very air you breathe feel like swallowing microscopic shards of glass. Dr. Eris Thorne had come to think of the cold as the true god of this land, an indifferent deity of absolute zero. For 3 months, he had been its unwilling acolyte, serving the interests of a far more mundane and demanding master, Omnicorp Mining. His official purpose was prospecting, using state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar to map the subterranean geology of this godforsaken corner of Alaska. He was hunting for commercially viable veins of copper, zinc, maybe even a whisper of the rare earth metals that made the corporate heart beat faster. He was not looking for mysteries. He was a geologist, a man of rock and time, of pressure and strata. He dealt in the provable, the measurable, the profitable, which was why the anomaly was driving him slowly, irrevocably mad. It had appeared 3 days ago on a deep-skin survey of the massif dominated by Mount Zenith, the jagged, perpetually shrouded sovereign of this particular mountain kingdom. The GPR was supposed to return a chaotic symphony of data, the messy, overlapping signatures of granite, schist, and quartzite, folded and fractured over millions of years. Instead, beneath the mountain's heart, nestled in 2,000 feet of solid rock, was a signal of impossible purity. It was a shape, a perfect, geometrically flawless pyramid. Eris had run the diagnostics a dozen times, then a dozen more. He recalibrated the entire array, checked every line of code in the imaging software, and even went out into the soul-crushing wind to physically inspect the emitters, his fingers growing numb and stupid in seconds. The result was always the same. A structure with 4 faces, each a perfect isosceles triangle, meeting at a single, sharp point. The base was a perfect square, each side measuring precisely 755 feet, the exact dimension of the Great Pyramid of Giza. A coincidence so absurd he had laughed out loud, the sound swallowed by the howling wind. But this was no sand-swept relic of a long-dead pharaoh. This was buried under a mountain that geologists agreed was at least 60 million years old. The structure's surfaces were smoother than anything nature could produce, reflecting the radar waves with an eerie, polished coherence. It was a mathematical certainty sitting in a geological impossibility. He hadn't told Omnicorp. Not yet. His supervisor, a perpetually impatient man named Decker, would see it as a distraction, a flight of fancy. "Find me or Thorne," he'd say, his voice tinny and dismissive over the satellite link. "Not fairy tales." So Eris confided in the only other 2 souls within a 100-mile radius who might understand, Dr. Kenji Tanaka and Silas. Sully. O'Connell. Kenji, a seismologist and data wizard, was Eris's intellectual foil. Where Eris was intuitive and prone to leaps of faith, Kenji was a creature of pure logic, a man who trusted his numbers above all else. He sat before the holographic display in the command hub of the GeoHab, his brow furrowed, his fingers dancing across the console as he manipulated the image of the anomaly. The pyramid floated in the air between them, a ghostly blue wireframe suspended within the raw, jagged data of the mountain. "It's not an error," Kenji said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "The signal-to-noise ratio is too high. The return path is too clean. This is a real object. The density is off the charts, far greater than the surrounding granite. And the material, it's not just smooth Eris. It's almost perfectly non-conductive and shows zero magnetic signature. It's a ghost to every sensor except the GPR. Sully, the camp's engineer and chief driller, was a different breed entirely. A thick-shouldered man with a beard full of frost and hands like worn leather, he viewed the world in terms of practical problems and their solutions. He stood with his arms crossed, squinting at the hologram. "So what are you saying? Some ancient Eskimos built a pyramid, and then a mountain grew on top of it?" He grunted, his skepticism a tangible force in the room. "The timeline's a little off, Sully," Eris said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "By about 60 million years. And they didn't have diamond-edged tunnel borers. So, aliens," Sully stated, not as a question, but as a flat declaration, as if he were identifying a faulty gasket. "It's the only thing that fits the facts you're giving me." Kenji winced. "Let's not jump to conclusions. There could be an unknown geological phenomenon, a crystalline formation of unprecedented scale and purity. A crystal in the shape of a perfect pyramid with the same base dimensions as Giza?" Eris countered. "Come on, Kenji. The odds of that are astronomical. More astronomical than little green men building vacation homes under Alaska?" Sully retorted, though his eyes remained fixed on the glowing blue shape, a flicker of something, not belief, but profound curiosity, igniting in their depths. The conversation with Decker went exactly as Eris had predicted. "A data ghost, Thorn. A harmonic resonance in the rock. I've seen it before. Reroute your survey grid 50 miles to the east. My sources suggest a promising copper deposit in that sector. Don't waste any more time on this." "But, sir," Eris protested, "the data is unequivocal. This is a structure. It's artificial. It could be the greatest discovery in human history." There was a long, static-filled pause on the line. When Decker's voice returned, it was laced with ice. "Your job, Dr. Thorne, is to find things we can dig up and sell. Your contract does not include the greatest discovery in human history. That falls under the purview of our PR department, and they don't get involved until there's something to monetize. You have your orders. Log the anomaly as a geological peculiarity and move on. Is that clear?" It was perfectly clear. Omnicorp wasn't interested. They would classify the data, bury it in a digital vault, and the pyramid would sleep for another 1,000,000 years. The thought was unbearable. That night, the three of them gathered again around the hologram. The pyramid seemed to mock them with its silent, geometric perfection. "He wants me to delete it," Eris said, the words tasting like ash. "To wipe the raw data." Kenji stared at the floor. "He's protecting the company. An unknown variable of this magnitude, it's a risk. Financially, politically, they can't control it." Sully, however, slammed his mug of coffee down on the table. "To hell with that. To hell with Decker." He pointed a thick finger at the hologram. "I've been drilling rock for 30 years. I've seen weird things. Gas pockets that sing, ice cores with plants frozen in them from before the Ice Age. But I've never seen anything like this. We can't just walk away." "What do you suggest we do, Sully?" Kenji asked. "Storm the corporate headquarters with a strongly worded letter?" "No," Sully said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. "I suggest we use the equipment they gave us. We've got a Series 9 plasma borer sitting in the hangar, rated for deep core sampling. Decker's not due for a site visit for another 6 weeks. The next supply flight is in 4. We've got a window." Eris felt a jolt, a mix of terror and exhilaration. "You're talking about drilling? Without authorization?" "I'm talking about deep core sampling," Sully corrected him, his eyes twinkling. "We're just going to take a sample from an area of unusual geological density. It's right there in the mission parameters. We're being good employees." Kenji looked pale. "The risks are enormous. If we're caught, it's not just our careers. Omnicorp's legal department could put us in debt for the rest of our lives. And that's the best case scenario. What's the worst case?" Eris asked, his heart hammering. Sully looked from the hologram to Eris, his grin gone, his expression deadly serious. The worst case is we drill into something we shouldn't, and we never have to worry about Omnicorp's lawyers again." The decision was made in the silence that followed. It was a mutiny born of scientific curiosity and a shared defiance against the crushing weight of corporate indifference. They had 3 weeks. For the next few days, they worked with a feverish, clandestine energy. Sully and his small team of roughnecks, who were loyal to him and not the corporation, began assembling the plasma borer on a reinforced platform at the base of Mount Zenith. The official story was that they were calibrating it for the move east. Kenji, meanwhile, worked on refining the target, using subtle seismic pulses to create a 3-dimensional acoustic map of the pyramid's apex. He had to be careful. Too much energy could attract unwanted attention from Omnicorp's monitoring stations. Eris handled the logistics, falsifying supply requests and rerouting power, creating a digital smoke screen to hide their activities. The mountain seemed to watch them. Strange weather patterns swirled around Zenith's peak. Sudden, violent winds would whip up out of nowhere, forcing the drilling team to take cover. Kenji detected micro-tremors, localized seismic events originating from deep within the mountain that had no geological explanation. They were like a slow, deep heartbeat. "It's almost as if it knows we're here," Kenji murmured one night, his face illuminated by the green glow of his seismograph. "The mountain is settling," Eris said, trying to convince himself as much as Kenji. "We're disturbing it." "It's not settling," Kenji replied, pointing to a waveform on the screen. "Look at this. It's a pattern. It's complex. It's repeating." The day of the drill was unnaturally calm. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air was still. Sully stood at the controls of the borer, a massive, insect-like machine humming with immense power. The plasma drill head, a ring of focused energy emitters, whined as it spooled up. "Target locked." Kenji's voice crackled over the comms from the geohab. 2,142 feet to the target surface. "Godspeed, Sully." Sully gave a thumbs up and engaged the drill. With a deafening roar that shattered the Arctic silence, a beam of incandescent energy, hotter than the surface of the sun, lanced downwards. Rock and ice vaporized in its path. The first 1,000 feet were easy, boring through the younger, softer rock of the mountain's outer layers. But then they hit the ancient granite, the primordial bone of the continent. The drill's progress slowed to a crawl. The power consumption spiked. The entire rig shuddered, groaning under the strain. Days blurred into a grueling cycle of drilling, cooling, and maintenance. The micro-tremors from within the mountain grew more frequent, more intense, as if in response to their intrusion. On the 5th day, an alarm shrieked through the rig. "Overload! The emitter ring is fluctuating!" Sully yelled over the noise. He fought with the controls, trying to stabilize the plasma stream. In the geohab, Eris and Kenji watched in horror as the energy readings went haywire. "Shut it down, Sully! Shut it down!" Eris shouted into the comms, but it was too late. With a sound like a thunderclap, a wave of energy erupted from the borehole. It wasn't heat or light, but something else. A concussive wave of pure force that threw the roughnecks off their feet and sent Sully stumbling back from the console. The rig's power died instantly. All their systems were fried. They were plunged into a sudden, terrifying silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind. For a moment, everyone was frozen. Then a new sound began. A low, resonant hum coming up from the borehole. It was a pure, single note that vibrated in their bones, in their teeth. Kenji's voice, shaky and filled with awe, came over the emergency battery-powered comms. "Eris. Sully, you're not going to believe this. The drill, it's through." "Through what?" Eris asked, his throat dry. "The rock?" "No," Kenji said. It's through the rock. The drill bit. It's in a void. There's nothing there. And the hum? We're picking it up. It's not seismic. It's acoustic. It's coming from the pyramid. They had breached it. They had knocked on a door that had been sealed for 60 million years, and something had answered. It took them 2 days to get a camera down the hole. The main rig was useless, its advanced electronics fused into slag. Sully, with his characteristic ingenuity, jury-rigged a hardened, low-tech borehole camera to a winch. Slowly, painstakingly, they lowered it down the 2,000-foot shaft they had created. Eris, Kenji, and Sully huddled around a small, flickering monitor in the drilling cabin, watching the grainy, black and white feed. They saw the rough, vitrified walls of the borehole, a perfect tube of melted rock. Then, the view changed. The rough rock ended, and the camera emerged into darkness. Switching to infrared, Sully muttered, flipping a switch. The image shifted, and they saw it. It wasn't a cavern. It was a surface. A perfectly flat, black, polished surface that stretched out of the camera's view in every direction. It reflected no heat. It was absolute black, a patch of nothingness. The plasma drill had punched a small, ragged hole, about a foot in diameter, through it. The apex, Eris whispered. We hit the apex. The hum was louder on the camera's microphone, a clean, resonant tone that seemed to fill the void. There was no dust, no debris, just the impossible black surface and the low, steady hum. Getting inside was the next, terrifying step. The plasma borer was dead. Their only option was explosives. Sully was an expert in shaped charges, but this was unlike anything he had ever attempted. The material of the pyramid was a complete unknown. Was it brittle? Would it shatter? Or would it absorb the blast without a scratch? They spent a week planning, using the last of their resources. They would use a series of small, precisely placed microcharges to cut a triangular opening around the initial breach. It was delicate, dangerous work. Eris and Sully had to be lowered down the borehole on a small platform, a terrifying descent into the Earth's crust. The air grew warmer, then strangely cool again as they neared the bottom. The hum was a constant presence, a vibration that seemed to bypass their ears and resonate directly in their skulls. Placing the charges on the black surface was an unnerving experience. The material was cold, not the natural cold of rock, but a deep, absolute cold that seemed to drain the heat from their fingertips even through their gloves. It felt slick, almost frictionless, like polished obsidian, but infinitely harder. There were no seams, no joints, no imperfections. It was a single, continuous piece. They ascended, their hearts in their throats, and Sully triggered the detonator. There was no loud explosion, only a series of sharp, cracking sounds, like ice breaking. A cloud of vapor, not dust, billowed up from the borehole. When it cleared, they set the camera down again. It had worked. A perfect, triangular section of the black material had been cut away, revealing a dark opening. An entrance. The air that drifted up from the opening was ancient, sterile, and carried a faint, metallic scent, like ozone after a lightning strike. There was no debate. They had to go in. They assembled a small expedition team. Eris, the geologist, Kenji, the analyst, his initial caution now completely consumed by a burning need for answers, and Sully, the engineer, armed with cutting tools and a healthy dose of pragmatism. They left one of Sully's trusted roughnecks, a young man named Jax, to man the winch and communications from the surface. The descent was a journey into another world. As they passed through the opening, the world of rock and ice vanished, replaced by a realm of impossible architecture. The interior of the pyramid was vast, silent, and utterly alien. The first thing they noticed was the light. There were no lamps, no torches, no visible source of illumination. The entire space was filled with a soft, diffuse, blue-gray light that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. It cast no distinct shadows, creating a disorienting, dreamlike environment. The air was cold, but not the biting cold of the Arctic. It was a still, neutral cold, and it was perfectly breathable, though the metallic tang was stronger here. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were all made of the same seamless, light-absorbing black material. But here, on the inside, the surfaces were not blank. They were covered, from floor to ceiling, in intricate, mesmerizing patterns. They were not paintings. They were carved into the material itself, fine as a spider's thread. The patterns were a mix of flowing, calligraphic script and complex, interlocking geometric shapes. And they were not static. As Eris ran his hand over a section of the wall, the glyphs pulsed with a soft, internal light, the blue-gray luminescence brightening in response to his touch. "My God!" Kenji breathed, his voice hushed. He was running a portable spectrometer over the walls. "The readings are impossible. The material is a carbon-based polymer, but its atomic structure is crystalline. It's like a diamond, but arranged in a way that shouldn't be stable. And this light, it's not thermal radiation. It's some form of bioluminescence, but there's nothing biological here. It's solid-state light. The walls themselves are the light source." They stood in a long, sloping causeway that led down from the apex, deeper into the heart of the structure. The scale was immense, dwarfing the cathedrals of old Earth. The silence was absolute, broken only by their own breathing and the ever-present, low hum that seemed to be the pyramid's own lifeblood. As they walked, Eris noticed something deeply unsettling about the geometry of the place. The corridor seemed to stretch on for longer than its external dimensions would allow. Angles that should have been 90 degrees felt subtly, maddeningly wrong. It was a space built with a knowledge of physics that was far beyond their own. It was non-Euclidean, not in a jarring, obvious way, but in a quiet, insidious manner that frayed the edges of their perception. After what felt like an hour of descent, the causeway opened into a chamber of breathtaking scale. It was a cavern of artificial creation, so vast that the far walls were lost in the soft, gray gloom. And in the exact center of this chamber, floating, was the source of the hum. It was a colossal artifact, a crystal of some kind, at least 50 feet in diameter. It was not a simple sphere, but a complex, multifaceted object, a thousand-sided jewel that rotated slowly, silently, in midair. It was the heart of the pyramid, the source of its power. Its facets caught the diffuse light, refracting it into complex, shifting patterns of liquid shadow that danced across the immense chamber. It was beautiful and terrifying, a piece of divine machinery. Arranged in a perfect circle around the floating crystal were 12 massive, sarcophagus-like pods. They were made of the same black, seamless material as the walls, each one at least 15 feet long. They were sealed, their surfaces covered in the same faintly glowing glyphs. "Are they tombs?" Kenji whispered, his voice trembling with awe. Eris walked towards the nearest pod, his boots making no sound on the strange floor. He ran his hand over its cold surface. The glyphs brightened under his touch. "No," he said softly. "They're not tombs. Look at the design. The seals are airtight. There are conduits running from the base of each pod towards the central crystal. This isn't a place of death. It's a place of preservation." Sully, ever the pragmatist, had unslung a portable ultrasonic scanner from his pack. He placed it against the side of the pod. He frowned at the readings on his handheld device. "It's dense. Too dense. I can't get a clear image. But there's something inside. It's organic. And it's dormant. Not dead. The scanner is picking up cellular-level energy potential. They were incubators, stasis pods, lifeboats. The realization settled over them with crushing weight. This pyramid was not a monument. It was an ark. They had no way of deciphering the glyphs, the silent story written on the walls. The context was too vast, the language too alien. They needed an expert, someone who could see the patterns, who could find the key to this impossible library. The decision was risky, but necessary. They would have to bring someone else in. Eris knew exactly who to call. Dr. Lena Petrova was a pariah in the academic world. A brilliant linguist and expert in proto-languages, her career had been sidelined by her radical theories about a universal, symbolic, meta-language that she believed was the foundation for all human communication. She claimed to see connections where no one else did, in the geometry of ancient art, in the mathematical spacing of cuneiform tablets. Most of her colleagues considered her a crank. Eris considered her a genius. Getting her to Alaska was a challenge. They concocted a cover story about needing a specialist to analyze anomalous inscriptions found on a unique geological formation, a half-truth at best. They used the last of their discretionary funds to fly her in, a huge gamble that would surely be noticed by Omnicorp's accountants. Lena arrived bundled in a parka, a small, intense woman with eyes that seemed to see right through you. She was skeptical, her expression a mixture of annoyance and professional curiosity. Eris led her to the GeoHab's command center, bypassing the pleasantries. He simply pointed to the high-resolution images of the glyphs they had taken from inside the pyramid. He said nothing. He just watched her. Lena stared at the screen. Her skepticism melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated wonder. She stepped closer, her breath fogging in the cold air of the hab. "This is not human," she whispered, her fingers tracing the patterns in the air. "The recursion? The fractal mathematics embedded in the syntax. This is a language designed by a mind that perceives dimensionality in a way we can't even conceive of." For the next week, Lena lived in a state of obsessive focus. She barely ate or slept. She sat before the holographic display, surrounded by printouts, her hands flying across a data pad as she cross-referenced the glyphs, searching for repetition, for structure, for the ghost of a grammar. Eris, Kenji, and Sully took turns taking her down into the pyramid, a place she immediately referred to as the library. She would stand for hours before a single wall panel, her face inches from the glowing script, her lips moving silently. She was not just reading, she was communing. The breakthrough came on the 8th day. Lena let out a sharp cry, a sound that was half sob, half shout of triumph. She was pointing at a specific sequence of glyphs that repeated near the base of each of the 12 pods. "It's a key," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and excitement. "It's not a word. It's a concept. A prime number sequence encoded into a geometric formula. It's a designation. It means contents or specimen. And this is the index." She pointed to a vast, circular pattern on the floor directly beneath the floating crystal. It was a star map, but the constellations were alien, unrecognizable. And at its center was not a star, but a symbol of terrifying simplicity. A spiral turning in on itself, a symbol of a galaxy. "They weren't from our solar system," Kenji said, stating the obvious. "They weren't from our galaxy." Lena corrected him, her eyes wide. "This is a map of intergalactic space. And this pyramid, it's one of many. It's a node in a network that spans millions of light years." With Lena's key, the story on the walls began to unfold. It was not a history of kings and empires, but a scientific and philosophical treatise of unimaginable scope. The builders, as Lena called them, were a species that had evolved over billions of years. They were not biological in the way we understood it. They were beings of integrated energy and crystalline consciousness, capable of traversing the void without shifts, of shaping matter and energy with thought. They were explorers, observers, librarians of the cosmos. They had watched Earth for eons, seeing the dinosaurs rise and fall, watching the first primates climb down from the trees. They never interfered. Their prime directive was one of absolute non-intervention. They were simply witnesses. But they were not alone in the universe. The glyphs told of another force, something they called the Ko's Choi, which Lena loosely translated as the Great Unmaking or the Silent Fade. It was not an empire or a species. It was a cosmic phenomenon, a wave of hyperentropy, a fundamental force that consumed energy, silenced stars, and unraveled the fabric of reality itself. It was not malevolent. It was simply a law of the universe, a final, inevitable decay. The builders could not stop it. They could only outrun it. And so they began their great work. They traveled to young galaxies, to worlds teeming with nascent life, and they built the libraries. They were not just archives of their own knowledge. They were arks. Within the 12 pods beneath Mount Zenith were the genetic blueprints, the very essence of 12 different species they had deemed worthy of preservation, saved from galaxies that had already been silenced by the Fade. The pyramid was a seed, a message in a bottle, a final, desperate act of cosmic preservation. It was designed to remain dormant until the world's dominant species achieved a level of technology capable of detecting it and, more importantly, a level of wisdom capable of understanding it. "We were not supposed to find this with a plasma drill," Eris said, the weight of their transgression settling upon him. "We forced the lock." As if in response to his words, the hum from the central crystal deepened. The blue-gray light in the chamber intensified, pulsing in time with the slow, deep heartbeat they had first detected days ago. "What's happening?" Sully demanded, his hand instinctively going to the heavy-duty cutter on his belt. Kenji was staring at his tricorder, his face ashen. "Energy levels are spiking. The crystal is activating. Our presence, our equipment, the breach in the hull, we've triggered something. A diagnostic sequence, maybe? Or a wake-up call." On the far side of the chamber, one of the 12 pods began to glow more brightly than the others. The glyphs on its surface shifted, flowing like water, coalescing into a new, single symbol. "That one," Lena whispered. "The index calls it the Gardener. A species that seeded life, not just observed it." A thin seam of brilliant white light appeared around the edge of the pod's main hatch. With a soft hiss of ancient air, the seal broke. The pod was opening. They were frozen, caught between terror and a paralyzing sense of awe. They were about to witness the rebirth of a creature from a dead galaxy, a being older than the mountains, older than humanity itself. And then, the voice of Jax, panicked and distorted, crackled over their comms. "Eris! Sully! You've got company. A chopper is coming in hot, no transponder, military markings. It's Omnicorp. Decker's on board. And they look like they're armed for war." Decker had seen the energy spike. He had seen the falsified logs. He knew. And he was coming to claim his prize. They were trapped. The pod was opening before them, and a corporate death squad was descending from above. The choice was immediate and absolute. "We can't let them have this," Eris said, his voice ringing with a certainty that surprised him. "Humanity is not ready for this. We're not. We're still children fighting over shiny rocks." "What are you suggesting?" Kenji asked, his eyes darting between the opening pod and the ceiling. "Sully," Eris said, turning to the engineer. "The charges we used to get in. Do you have any left?" Sully's eyes widened in understanding. He patted a heavy satchel on his belt. Enough to bring the whole damn borehole down on top of us. Then that's what we do, Eris declared. We seal it. We bury it again. We buy them time. Buy who time? Sully asked. Them, Eris said, nodding towards the pod, which was now opened by a few inches, a strange, floral scent mixing with the metallic air. Or us. I'm not sure. Lena was frantically taking pictures of the pod's glyphs with a shielded, hardened camera. I need the sequence. The activation sequence, she yelled, her academic curiosity overriding her sense of self-preservation. Lena, we have to go. Now! Sully grabbed her arm, pulling her away. They ran. They scrambled back up the long, sloping causeway, the hum of the pyramid rising to a deafening roar behind them. The very air vibrated with power. As they reached the apex, Sully paused, placing the last of his charges around the entrance. This is gonna be a one-way trip, kids. Hope Jax is ready on that winch. He set the timer for 2 minutes, and they scrambled onto the small platform. Haul us up, Jax. Haul like your life depends on it. Sully screamed into the calm. The winch engaged, and they began their rapid, swaying ascent into the darkness of the borehole. Below them, the light from the pyramid's entrance was a brilliant, pulsing blue. They were halfway up when the charges detonated. The explosion was immense. The entire mountain shuddered. The borehole collapsed in on itself, a torrent of rock and melted slag plunging downwards to seal the opening. A blast of superheated air and pressure shot up the shaft, threatening to snap the winch cable. They were thrown against the rough walls, the platform swinging wildly. And then silence. They hung in the darkness, swaying gently, the only sound the creak of the cable and their own ragged breathing. They had done it. They had sealed the library. They emerged into the blinding glare of the Arctic sun. The Omnicorp helicopter was circling overhead like a vulture. They didn't have much time. They abandoned the fried equipment, grabbed their emergency packs, and fled on snowmobiles into the vast, white wilderness. They were fugitives now, disgraced, hunted, with no proof of what they had found. Omnicorp's official story was that Dr. Thorne and his team had suffered a psychotic break due to isolation, sabotaged $1 billion worth of equipment, and vanished into the wild. They were presumed dead. 6 months later, in a cramped, cluttered apartment in Anchorage, the 3 survivors huddled around a laptop. They were thinner, haunted, but their eyes burned with a shared purpose. On the screen was the last picture Lena had taken. A single, clear image of the glyphs on the opening pod. The activation sequence. I think I understand it now, Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. It's not just a language. It's a form of molecular programming. A set of instructions. Eris looked out the window at the city lights, at the world of men and machines, a world completely oblivious to the cosmic secret sleeping beneath the Alaskan ice. He had sacrificed the greatest discovery in history, but he had also protected it. The pyramid was still there. The gardener was still waiting. The great unmaking was still out there, somewhere in the silent darkness between galaxies, sweeping inexorably towards them. They had no proof, no allies, no resources. All they had was a single photograph and a terrible, magnificent secret. Their work had just begun. The 6 months following their escape from Mount Zenith were a lesson in the art of being ghosts. Fugitives from a trillion-dollar corporation become adept at dissolving into the background noise of civilization. Anchorage, with its transient population of oil workers, fishermen, and fortune seekers, was a good place to be invisible. They shed their names like old skins. Eris Thorne, the haunted geologist, became Alex Branch, a freelance surveyor who spent his days poring over public geological data, searching for patterns that had nothing to do with ore. Dr. Kendi Tanaka, the data wizard, became Kevin Lee, a reclusive day trader, his genius for pattern recognition channeled into the chaotic flux of the stock market, earning them just enough to survive. Silas, Sully, O'Connell, the master engineer, was now Sam Jones, a gruff but brilliant mechanic in a greasy portside garage, his hands that once commanded a plasma borer now coaxing life back into dying diesel engines. And Dr. Lena Petrova, the linguist who had communed with an alien syntax, was Laura Finn, a quiet, intent woman who worked as a remote transcriptionist for medical journals, her mind a universe away from the dry terminology she typed. Their lives were a tapestry of paranoia and routine. They paid for everything in cash. They used burner phones, switching them out every 2 weeks. They never stayed in one place for more than a few months. Their cramped apartment, smelling of stale coffee and ozone from Kenji's overworked servers, was a pressure cooker of shared trauma and obsessive purpose. The world believed them dead, victims of a tragic accident and subsequent mental collapse in the Arctic wilderness. Omnicorp's official narrative had been ruthlessly efficient, but they knew Decker wasn't the type to accept loose ends. They were not just hiding, they were waiting. The focus of their existence, the sun around which their broken lives orbited, was the photograph. A single, high-resolution image of the glyphs on the Gardner pod, saved on an encrypted, air-gapped hard drive. For Lena, it was more than a photograph. It was a sacred text. She spent 18 hours a day at a makeshift workstation in the corner of the living room, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen, the alien script reflected in her glasses. She wasn't just translating. She was reverse engineering a consciousness. "It's not a command, it's a conversation," she explained one night, her voice frayed with exhaustion. The others were gathered around her, the ever-present tension in the room tightening. "We thought activation sequence was like flipping a switch. It's not. It's the opening statement in a dialogue, a call and response. The glyphs describe a required energy signature, a specific quantum state that has to be generated and focused on the pod. But that's only half of it." She pointed to a complex, repeating cluster of symbols. "This part, it's a biological key. It describes a catalyst. It needs a specific, complex organic molecule to receive the energy transmission and complete the circuit. Without both, the call goes unanswered." Kenji leaned in, his own fatigue etched onto his face. "What kind of energy signature?" "Something I've never seen," Lena admitted. "The physics it describes, it treats space-time as a variable, not a constant. It requires the generation of what it calls a phase-coherent graviton, a particle that, according to our physics, shouldn't exist." Sully snorted, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Great. So we need a magic particle and a mystery goo to open a door we blew up, to talk to an alien we probably shouldn't wake up, all while the biggest company on Earth is hunting us. Any other good news?" The bad news came a week later, delivered by Kenji. He had been carefully, painstakingly, slipping through the back doors of Omnicorp's internal networks. It was risky, like a mouse exploring the wiring of a mousetrap, but necessary. His face was pale as he turned from his monitors. "They're back at Zenith," he said, his voice low. "Decker has established a permanent installation. It's massive. Calls it Omnigeological Research Outpost 7. It's a fortress. And they're drilling again." Eris felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. "How?" The borehole collapsed. "They're not using a plasma borer," Kenji replied, bringing up a satellite image on the main screen. It was blurry, but the scale of the operation was clear. A sprawling complex of domes and towers now sat at the base of the mountain. They brought in someone new, a Dr. Evelyn Reed. Her field is exotic matter physics and resonance mechanics. They've built a new kind of drill. It doesn't melt the rock. It shatters it at a molecular level with tuned vibrations. It's slower, but it's getting through the slag we created. According to their internal projections, they'll reach the pyramid's hull in less than a month. The name Evelyn Reeves sent a jolt through Eris. He knew her by reputation. She was his shadow, a brilliant mind unburdened by ethics. Where Eris saw wonder in the Earth's mysteries, Reeves saw systems to be cracked and exploited. Decker hadn't just replaced them, he had upgraded. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in. Their time, which had stretched out in an indefinite haze of hiding, now had a deadline. Decker was knocking on the door of the library again, and this time he had a battering ram. "We can't do this alone," Eris said, the words tasting like defeat. "We need a lab. We need computing power. We need someone who can build a machine that makes magic particles. People with those kinds of resources don't help fugitives presumed dead," Sully stated flatly. "They call the cops. Or in our case, they call Omnicorp. Maybe not all of them," Kenji murmured, his eyes distant. He was already typing, his fingers flying across his keyboard, diving into the deepest, most hidden corners of the web. "There's a story. A ghost in the machine of the tech world. A man named Julian Croft." The name was vaguely familiar to Eris. A tech prodigy from the early days of the quantum computing race. He had published a series of papers that were so far ahead of their time, they were dismissed as science fiction. Then, at the height of his fame, he had vanished, cashed out his stocks, liquidated his assets, and simply disappeared from public life. "They say he became a recluse," Kenji continued, pulling up old, grainy photos of a young man with wild eyes and an arrogant smirk. "A paranoid billionaire hiding from the world. But there are whispers, rumors of a private research facility, a Prometheus station, built somewhere in the Aleutian chain. A place where he plays with the kind of technology that governments can only dream of. How do we even get to a guy like that?" Sully asked. "You can't just send him an email." "No," Lena said, looking up from her own screen, a flicker of an idea in her eyes. "You send him a message he can't ignore." She pointed to a years-old forum on a quantum physics board. It was a single post by an anonymous user, widely believed to be Croft. It was a complex problem, a theoretical equation for stabilizing a quantum wormhole that the world's best minds had dismissed as unsolvable, a mathematical joke. "We solve it," Lena said simply. "We solve the unsolvable problem. And we sign it with a glyph from the library." The next 2 weeks were a blur of intellectual fury. Lena, with her intuitive grasp of the alien mathematics, and Kenji, with his raw processing power and coding genius, threw themselves at the problem. They ate at their desks, slept in shifts, their arguments and breakthroughs echoing in the small apartment. Eris and Sully became their support staff, running for food, maintaining the servers, and keeping watch. It was a desk. 10th day, Kenji let out a yell and pushed back from his desk, his face a mask of disbelief and triumph. "Done," he breathed. "The answer. It's beautiful." He typed the solution into the old forum, a string of code and equations that was an elegant poem of pure mathematics. And at the end, he embedded a single, tiny image file, a glyph from the pyramid wall, the one Lena had translated as to see beyond. They hit post and waited, the silence in the room thick with anticipation. Less than 10 hours later, a black, unmarked helicopter descended on the public park across from their apartment building. 2 figures in discreet, professional suits emerged and walked directly to their building, to their door. There was no knock, just a quiet, polite voice from the other side. "Dr. Thorne? Mr. Croft would like to have a word." Julian Croft's private island was not on any public map. From the air, It was a shard of volcanic rock and lush green forest shrouded in the perpetual mist of the Aleutian Islands. But as their aircraft, a sleek, silent VTOL jet, descended, the island's secret was revealed. Nestled in the caldera of the dormant volcano was Prometheus Station. It was a city of glass and white chrome, a network of interconnected biodomes and subterranean labs that hummed with clean, quiet energy. It was a scientist's paradise. Julian Croft was not what Eris had expected. The photos had shown a young firebrand. The man who greeted them in the main atrium was in his late 50s, with a calm, unnerving stillness about him. His eyes, however, still held the same fire, a restless intelligence that seemed to analyze everything at once. "The language of your equation was elegant," Croft said, his voice a soft baritone. He led them through a stunning atrium where hummingbirds flitted between exotic flowers. "But the signature was what truly caught my attention. I've been chasing theoreticals like that my whole life. You seem to have found a practical application." They told him everything. The GPR anomaly, the pyramid, the glyphs, the stasis pods, the builders, the great unmaking, Omnicorp, Decker. They held nothing back. Croft listened with unnerving patience, his face betraying no emotion. When they were finished, he stood and walked to a vast window overlooking the turbulent gray waters of the Bering Sea. "I spent 20 years and half my fortune building this place," he said quietly, "because I knew the world of corporate and government science was a cage. It rewards conformity and punishes true innovation. I came here to be free. What you've described, it's the ultimate validation of everything I've ever believed. That we are not the first, and that the universe is infinitely more complex than we imagine." He turned back to them, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Of course, I'll help you. To do otherwise would be unforgivably boring. Prometheus Station and all its resources are at your disposal. Let's go build a machine that makes magic particles." The weeks that followed were the most intense and productive of their lives. For the first time, they were not limited by resources, only by the boundaries of their own minds. Kenji and Lena were given access to Janus, Croft's quantum supercomputer, a machine so powerful it made Omnicorp's best look like a pocket calculator. They began simulating the energy signature, trying to find a way to generate a stable phase-coherent graviton without accidentally tearing a hole in reality. Eris worked with Croft's geology team, using a network of private, deep-skin satellites to monitor Mount Zenith. The news was not good. Dr. Reed's resonance drill was chewing through the rock with terrifying efficiency. They were less than 200 meters from the pyramid's hull. Time was running out. Sully, in his element, found a home in Croft's vast engineering workshops. He worked with Croft's engineers, who looked at him first with suspicion, then with a deep and abiding respect for his intuitive, hands-on genius. They weren't designing a drill. They were designing a key. "When we blew the entrance," Sully explained, sketching on a holographic design table, "we created a plug of melted and shattered rock. But the pyramid itself is still intact. The original opening is still there, just blocked. We don't need to drill. We need to resonate. We find the unique resonant frequency of the pyramid's hull material, and we use focused sonic pulses to vibrate the plug to dust. We knock, we don't break down the door." The final piece of the puzzle came from Lena and Kenji, and it was the most shocking of all. The biological catalyst, the organic molecule needed to complete the circuit, was not alien. It was human. Specifically, it was a dormant retrovirus embedded in human junk DNA, a sequence that was inert in 99.9% of the population. "It's a key," Lena whispered, her face pale as she looked at the decoded genetic sequence. "A marker left behind. The builders didn't just observe us. At some point, in our distant, primordial past, they touched our genome. They left a key inside us, waiting for the day we could find the lock. On a hunch, driven by a cold sense of premonition, Eris had Croft's medical team run his own genetics against the sequence. The results came back an hour later. He was a carrier. The dormant gene was active in his DNA. He was the key. The realization was staggering. The responsibility was crushing. He was not just a geologist anymore. He was a component in a 60-million-year-old machine. The day the alarms went off, the island was hit by a sudden, violent squall. A klaxon blared through the serene corridors of Prometheus Station. Eris ran to the command center to find Croft and Kenji staring grimly at the main screen. A live satellite feed of Mount Zenith showed a massive energy bloom. "They're through," Kenji said, his voice tight. "Decker's team has breached the hull." The pyramid was responding. Deep within the mountain, the steady, low hum had risen to an angry roar. The internal light was fluctuating wildly. The library was under attack, and its automated immune system was beginning to kick in. "Decker has no idea what he's dealing with," Eris said. "He's a child playing with a fusion reactor." "We have to go," Croft said, his calm demeanor replaced by a cold, decisive focus. "Now!" The journey back to Zenith was a surreal experience. They flew in the Strix, Croft's custom-built stealth VTOL, a matte black specter that slipped through military radar like a ghost. On board were Eris, Lena, Kenji, and Sully, along with Croft and a small, elite team of his private security, clad in advanced, non-metallic body armor. They were armed not with guns, but with sophisticated sonic stunners and EMP devices. As they approached the mountain, they could see the Omnicorp outpost lit up like a city. But their target was a small, secondary site a few miles away, where Sully's team had secretly airdropped the components for his sonic resonator. They had to get back into the pyramid before Decker could consolidate his control, or, worse, trigger something catastrophic. The inside of the pyramid was a war zone of light and sound. The calm, blue-gray luminescence was gone, replaced by strobing flashes of red and white light. The gentle hum was now a discordant, shrieking alarm that vibrated through the floor. Omnicorp's intrusion had triggered a hostile response. Floating, spherical drones, made of the same black material as the walls, zipped through the vast chambers, firing focused beams of energy at the Omnicorp soldiers who were trying to advance down the main causeway. Decker had established a command post in the great central chamber, his soldiers taking cover behind the massive stasis pods. In the center of it all stood Dr. Evelyn Reed. She had managed to interface directly with the floating crystal, surrounding it with a web of Omnicorp technology, trying to brute force its systems. She was pouring raw power into it, trying to bend it to her will. "She's going to cause a meltdown," Kenji yelled over the din, looking at the wild energy readings on his handheld device. "The crystal is a stable singularity. She's destabilizing the containment field." Decker saw them enter the chamber, and his face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Thorn, you're supposed to be dead," he roared, signaling his men to fire. Croft's security team moved with fluid efficiency, deploying a wide-field EMP that disabled Omnicorp's weapons. A firefight of sonic blasts and energy beams erupted in the heart of the ancient structure. "We have to get to the Gardner pod," Eris shouted to Lena. "It's the only way." Sully and Croft's team laid down covering fire, creating a path. Eris and Lena sprinted across the chamber, the air crackling with energy. They reached the pod, the same one that had begun to open months ago. It was now sealed tight, glowing with a faint, defensive energy. "The sequence?" Eris yelled. "It's not about starting it. It's about talking to it." Lena, sheltering behind the pod, worked frantically on her data pad, programming the sonic resonator Sully's team had brought with them to emit the precise frequencies of the call. "It's ready," she shouted. "But it needs the catalyst. It needs you." At the center of the room, Reed let out a cry of triumph as one of her consoles turned green. "I have it! I have control!" she screamed at Decker. But the look on her face was one of terror. The crystal's light turned a blinding white, and the entire pyramid began to shake violently. She hadn't gained control. She had simply opened the floodgates. "Eris, now!" Kenji screamed. Eris looked at the pod, at the glowing glyphs, at the chaos unfolding around him. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't a key to turn on a machine. He was an ambassador. He placed his bare hand on the cold, smooth surface of the pod. At the same moment, Lena activated the resonator. A wave of pure, clean energy washed over him. It wasn't a sound. It was a concept. A question. Who are you? The world dissolved. He was no longer in the pyramid. He was floating in a sea of pure information. He saw the builders, vast and serene, moving between stars. He felt their deep, abiding sorrow as they watched galaxies fade and die before the silent advance of the Kostoid. He saw them arrive at a young, violent Earth, a world of volcanoes and steaming seas. He saw them gently, carefully, weaving a single thread of their own essence into the planet's chaotic primordial soup. A legacy, a hope. He didn't speak with words. He answered with his own being. He showed the sleeping consciousness of the gardener everything. The rise of cities, the beauty of a symphony, the cruelty of a war, the quiet love of a parent for a child, the boundless curiosity that had driven him from a small town to the heart of this impossible mystery. He showed it humanity, in all its flawed, contradictory, beautiful glory. He didn't ask for power. He asked for partnership. He pleaded for a chance. In the chamber, the blinding white light from the central crystal suddenly converged, lancing out to strike Dr. Reed's equipment, vaporizing it instantly. The violent shaking stopped. The shrieking alarm fell silent, replaced once again by the low, steady hum of the pyramid at peace. The spherical drones went dormant, retracting into the walls. The battle was over. Decker and a stunned, powerless Reed were quickly surrounded by Croft's team. Eris collapsed to his knees, gasping, the connection severed. His hand was still on the pod. It felt warm. In the aftermath, a new world order was quietly born. With Omnicorp's senior leadership captured and implicated in a host of illegal activities, Julian Croft used his immense wealth and influence to absorb their research division and take control of the Mount Zenith site. He established the Ethelgard Institute, an international, non-governmental organization dedicated to the study and protection of the library. Its existence was the world's most guarded secret. Eris, Kenji, Lena, and Sully were no longer fugitives. They were the board of directors. They were the guardians. Eris often walked the silent corridors of the pyramid, now a place of quiet study rather than conflict. He was its ambassador, the only human who could safely interface with its systems. The gardener remained dormant, but it was aware. It was listening. It was learning. The terraforming sequence had been halted, put on indefinite hold. A dialogue had begun. One evening, Eris stood with the others in the central chamber, looking at the vast, silent star map on the floor, the spiral symbol of the distant galaxy that had been silenced by the fates seemed to mock them with its emptiness. "It's still out there," Kenji said softly, his voice echoing in the immense space. "The great unmaking. It's still coming." "I know," Eris replied, looking at the calm, floating crystal. "But for the first time in 60 million years, this place isn't just a tomb or an archive. It's a workshop." He felt a sense of profound, terrifying peace. The greatest discovery in human history had been saved. Humanity had been given a reprieve. But the true work of preparing for the long night ahead, had only just begun.